They want to reduce deforestation, mitigate climate change, improve environmental conditions worldwide. It is a lofty goal, and it's a very good goal. Unfortunately, the way that they've chosen to go about that is kind of heavy-handed, in my opinion, and it lumps a lot of different types of agricultural production and commodities into one bucket, and then applies the same rules to all of them, which there are some agricultural producers like sophisticated farming, agribusinesses in the United States or even in Brazil or certainly across Europe that will be able to comply with some fairly sophisticated technical requirements and reporting requirements. And then there is, as you know, in the coffee industry, the vast majority of the global South, for which this is going to be a real challenge.
Friends, we have an announcement. On October 28, 29 and 30, Map It Forward is proud to present the first of its kind live online event titled Introduction to Regenerative Coffee Farming. This workshop will happen live in 3 different events in English, Spanish and Portuguese to help coffee producers and the rest of us in the coffee industry understand regenerative ag and how to implement it so that coffee farmers stand a chance at surviving these brutal weather conditions long into the future. It will also help us understand how we can talk about regenerative ag to our customers. This live online presentation will be led by highly specialized and experienced agronomists, coffee producers, and agricultural engineers who have worked transforming coffee farms from conventional farms to regenerative farms and agroforestry around the world. Tickets are $10 for coffee producers and $150 for everybody else. When you pay $150 though, you're securing your ticket and the ticket of 14 other coffee producers that didn't quite have the funds to pay for their own tickets. Not only does your ticket buy you access to the workshop, but it also gives you access to newly formed WhatsApp groups, one in English, one in Spanish, one in Portuguese, where people can continue to exchange information and ideas about regenerative ag before and after the workshops. For more details, head to mapitforward.coffee/workshops. Check the link in the show notes for details and help us spread the word about this workshop by sharing our posts on social media. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 1 of a brand new 5-part series with returning guest, Andrew Hetzel. Welcome back to the podcast, Andrew.
Hello and good morning.
From San Francisco.
from the city by the bay. Yeah, this isn't my usual backdrop. I'm taking this call from a hotel room at the first thing in the morning.
We're very grateful that you've made time for this. In this series, folks, we're going to have a conversation about the details of EUDR in a way that pretty much only Andrew could have this conversation with us. So I'm really grateful that you're here, Andrew, and I'm really grateful that we're able to navigate the details of EUDR. Now, there's so many ways we could approach this conversation. We're going to go through a couple of different things through this series, folks. We're going to talk about the purpose of EUDR, the technical details around it, and we're going to continue to progress from there over the 5 episodes. Where I would like to start this conversation though, Andrew, is first of all, I'd love you to people of what you do very briefly. And then I'd like you to tell everyone how you became somewhat of an expert on this.
Sure, that sounds like a good start. So I have worked in the coffee industry, almost exclusively in coffee for the last 20 or so years. I started with very humble beginnings as a salesperson of coffee equipment and barista trainer, and then very quickly progressed in, as I learned more about coffee in the industry, to working with coffee roasters on quality issues and buying, later designing and building roasting facilities. And then in about 2008 or so, I got the farming bug when I took my first origin trip to India and struck up a good friendship with a producer there and began volunteering, consulting with him on marketing and quality issues. And from there on, for most of the last 10 to 15 years, I have been a consultant on quality, marketing, and later more technical issues in coffee production and trade for a number of different international development projects. So these are programs that are funded by usually national organizations like USAID, like Australia's DFAT, like United Nations or other groups like that are working with smallholder farmers in poorer and developing countries to increase equity and earning from coffee production. So I'm often hired now as a consultant on those types of projects in some of the poorest countries in the world.
Mm. And you are back at school.
I am, yeah. So I'm curious about a number of different things beyond coffee, which drove me to re-enroll in school going back to 2017 when I got a bachelor's of science in agricultural business in big scale agriculture. Yeah, so that was in Colorado, and after that program, I decided to pursue a master's degree in the program is called Global Challenges, but it's essentially a combination of environmental studies, public health, and also international development studies. And the reason behind that is because coffee is obviously a very important commodity. It's a very important business for the tens or 100 million people that work in coffee worldwide. But there's quite a bit more that's out there, and the more time that I've spent in places where I work in big porkeries, I see that there's quite a bit beyond the scope of coffee that can be done to improve the livelihoods of people. So I hope to expand in that direction.
During that program, I'm clearly leading you somewhere with these questions. During that program,
Sure.
You had to write a paper.
I did.
And we arrive.
So in the first year of that master's program, this is what brought me to the European Anti-Deforestation Regulations.
Anti-deforestation.
Yeah, everyone forgets. That's a big part of that. The assignment was to analyze policy in environmental science and its potential impact on people, and critically analyze it, see if it will or will not achieve the results that it intends to. And for that it's like a capstone project, the environmental year. I focused on EUDR, and as it was a new and burgeoning piece of legislation that had recently been signed into law in mid 2023, and was picking up steam and certainly visibility as we got through the end of 2023. And the more I read about the rules and the technical requirements of the law, and also really the theory behind it, the more concerned I became, with my background in coffee and the work that I've done with producers in smallholder countries, because it just didn't compute. Some of the assumptions that were made, I just see as being accurate, and some of the things that coffee producers and also other smallholders like cacao producers and soy producers and palm oil producers are being asked to do just weren't practical, or in some cases possible in my experience. It set off alarm bells. So, I started reading more, researching the paper, looking at the science behind it, comparing it to other researchers' work, including some very nice people in the field that were also concurrently researching EUDR and its impacts on smallholder supply chains. And I was concerned and wrote a paper about it for my program, which then was published in Roast Magazine's Daily Coffee News in January of 2024 in a two-part series that talks about many of the same things that we'll discuss today. And it's nearly a year later, and the only thing that really has changed is that implementation has been delayed by 1 year, which doesn't really solve the problems. It gives the producers more time to comply with the regulations, but it doesn't actually change the situation very much at all. It just kicks the can down the road another 12 months, and we're going to have these same problems coming back again this time next year. So I think it's important that we talk about what the law is, what it's intending to do, what some of the challenges are going to be for coffee producers, and some of the things they can do to overcome those challenges. And then we can try to make some predictions on what the outcomes will be. But, I mean, it's really anyone's guess, because this whole field is totally experimental, and it's not something that's been tested before. So we really don't know what the impact is ultimately going to be, which is unfortunate because the test subjects are people.
Given that you feel that, or from the research that you've done, that the outcomes may not be favoring the coffee producer, what's the purpose of EUDR?
Well, the stated purpose is exactly the opposite, which is kind of interesting. If you read the rule of the legislation and the rationale behind it, and I think, there's a lot of good intentions behind this law. The idea is that the European Union is going to band together and take responsibility, which really few else are in the world, for deforestation that is happening globally as a result of the goods that Europeans are buying. Okay, so that's the basis. They want to reduce deforestation, mitigate climate change, improve environmental conditions worldwide. It is a lofty goal, and it's a very good goal. Unfortunately, the way that they've chosen to go about that is kind of heavy-handed, in my opinion, and it lumps a lot of different types of agricultural production and commodities into one bucket, and then applies the same rules to all of them, which there are some agricultural producers, like sophisticated farming, agribusinesses in the United States, or even in Brazil, or certainly across Europe, that will be able to comply with some fairly sophisticated technical requirements and reporting requirements. And then there is, as you know, in the coffee industry, the vast majority of the global South, for which this is going to be a real challenge. And the danger is that the people, the law has said explicitly will benefit from it, who are indigenous farmers in nations around the world, and the poor. There's the danger that those people are going to be the ones who have the greatest challenge complying, and are ultimately excluded from trade then with the European Union, and forced into either other livelihoods, or potentially into greater deforestation from changing their practices.
So if I understand you correctly, this is a legislation with a good intention. It
Absolutely. No question in my mind about that. Yeah.
The intention is that Europeans are saying that deforestation happens because we consume a whole bunch of stuff that's grown in the ground.
Yes.
And because of that,
there's no question. There's no. It's not even. It's not even controversial to say that agriculture is one of the leading causes of deforestation in the world. That's right. It is widely accepted in academia.
Right. And so the Europeans are saying, well, we have no right to go and tell people what they can do or they can't do. We can just create a barrier to decide if we will allow these commodities into Europe. You can continue doing what you're doing, but if you want to sell to us, this is the new standard that you have to meet in order to bring, let's stick with coffee, in order to bring coffee into the EU. And from my understanding, I tip my hat to Pedro Manga, he helped me understand this. It is my understanding that the responsibility of doing the due diligence to make sure that this coffee is compliant that comes into the EU once the legislation happens, is that the compliancing is required to happen by the person who imports the coffee.
Yes.
Whether it be they
correct.
import the green coffee or import the roasted coffee. It's very interesting that instant coffee is not included in that, in my mind, but perhaps
that's
you can
an unusual anomaly. Yeah.
Well, is it unusual?
it's
I mean, it's kind of obvious, no?
well, yeah, I mean, on its face, it immediately puts into question
Screams
the
lobbying,
intent,
bro.
and it really does. Because one could also say that the instant coffee market or soluble coffee market is even more complicated in terms
Yeah.
of tracing production to its source, because the supply chains are so opaque. It's just essentially whatever is left over at the end of the season in a lot of places worldwide. So that would increase the difficulty, would increase the cost. But again, if you're trying to treat the commodity fairly, it really realistically should be included in this sort of by its own rationale, it should be included, especially with the EU being such a large consumer of it.
Help me understand something. You know this legislation really well. So
pretty well. I can't say I'm an expert in the legislation, but yeah.
Well, the topic, I guess. So how does it end up being possible that this doesn't get included? Do they categorize the product as something other than coffee? It's like saying the difference between orange juice and orange drink.
Yeah, the technical reason is because of the tariff codes. So they have identified commodities by the 6 or 9 digit, I think it's 6 or 9 digit tariff codes that are harmonized and used in international trade.
Okay.
So if you're a coffee importer, you know that number for green coffee, and there's a separate number for decaffeinated green coffee. And it's like 0901, 0211, something like that off the top of my head, that is on every customs form bill of lading when you're shipping coffee across international borders. So the number for technically, so what happened is the tariff number for soluble coffee, which includes, I think, like coffee flavorings and maybe even like coffee flavored canning, all these other sorts of things, was not included as a part of this legislation. And I'm not sure how it came that way. One could speculate that there were lobbying forces, which I know also excluded certain leather products in Italy. But it's unfortunate, because the soluble coffee market is the one that is arguably most responsible for deforestation, because of the places where it is produced, primarily in West Africa and Southeast Asia, where deforestation is most likely most prominent. But it is not included as part of this legislation. So it is left for the Arabica producers, the Robusta producers of the world to deal with in commodity production, especially production.
To me, it sounds like this may lead to a lot more soluble coffee being produced.
Very possibly, yeah. I mean, that's a reasonable expectation.
Yippee. And those who didn't detect the sarcasm.
More soluble coffee consumption. But, by the same right. token, because it's not going to increase the price.
So if EUDR, if the purpose of it and the intention, I guess, behind it is to make sure that more responsibly grown coffee ends up in the EU, and it's there to set a standard, why do you think that because you mentioned that you don't think that they've done the right thing by including coffee in this. Why?
Well, the whole concept that their program is based on, this verification program, really, if you go back to it, the reason that coffee was selected as one of the 7 commodities that is linked with deforestation, it uses a controversial, maybe beyond experimental, I haven't seen it implemented in other places, let's just say a controversial concept called embodied deforestation.
Okay.
So when
what's that?
EU says, and the EU does say, that coffee production is responsible for 7% of global deforestation. Okay. They actually don't say, sorry, I should rephrase that. They don't actually say it's responsible for, they say it is associated with 7% of global deforestation. So the concept of embodied deforestation is that if coffee production in a nation increases in land area by 5%, then it is responsible for 5% of that country's deforestation during the same period. Okay. But there's an interesting sort of thing you need to consider there, which is that's not really causal. That's association. The
Yeah.
deforestation might be increasing in these places as a result of something else. And I argue that in most smallholder communities, that something else is really poverty. It's not coffee production. It could be in Brazil that there is a dramatic increase in cattle ranching that occurs at the same time that coffee production is expanding. And the cattle ranching is actually the leading cause of the deforestation, not the coffee production. But they don't actually look at those in such granular detail as to assign a cause. It's really just an association. So, first, problem with the way the law is designed is this: the reason that coffee was picked is because coffee production has been growing, and coffee production has been growing in places where deforestation is also happening. There isn't necessarily a direct link between those two, and yet coffee production is being fingered as a contributing cause of that deforestation, whether or not it's actually true.
Now, that's not to say that deforestation isn't happening because of coffee, because we know for a fact that it is.
Oh, yeah, I know. Absolutely. And also there's the question of, how are we defining deforestation? So the way the EU is defining deforestation, when I think of deforestation, maybe others, we're thinking of people going out and clear cutting Amazon rainforest and, building residential areas along the Amazon. That's not necessarily the case. So by the EU definition, you can be changing the land use of what is historically primary forest into even some type of agroforest system where coffee is potentially being grown underneath canopy shade trees, which leads to, in their description, the loss of biomass, net biomass. And there's certain limits that they have established for these things. So even growing coffee under coffee trees could be considered, growing coffee under canopy could be considered deforestation by the EU.
The part of this that I wonder the most is, have they assigned someone to understand the complexity of the problems in coffee that are leading to producers to perhaps cut down a few trees?
So if I heard that correctly, from the perspective of the EU, did they understand the complexity?
Yes, from the perspective of the EU. Maybe I should say that better. Okay. Coffee producers are cutting down trees to grow more coffee because the price of coffee, as it has historically in recent years, continues to go down. So they can't make enough money with the amount of coffee that they have. So they have to increase the yield, and one way to increase the yield is by cutting down trees and growing more coffee. Does the EU understand the complexity that's leading to that?
My assessment is no. And you can look at the demand study that was produced as the foundational report to justify this type of legislation. And if you read that demand study, they've studied a number of different commodities. The explanation of the coffee value chain is surprisingly thin.
Oh,
and
really?
It's on the order of, coffee is produced on estates, coffee is produced by smallholders. Smallholders tend to small parcels and they deliver to mills. Very sort of basic. It doesn't really look at the socioeconomic factors in different places, or really the real disparity between some of the estate-producing countries and the developing countries where the vast majority of coffee farmers operate. And what I find most shocking about the way that the study was designed is that they never interviewed coffee producers, or there were no really representatives of the coffee industry that were involved. Now they'll be the first to say, "Oh, we put out the concept of this legislation for comment, received I think like 1.7 million responses or something like that." But it was online, and it was a lot of responses that say, "Yeah, we agree, deforestation is bad."
Right.
And it doesn't really talk about the detail of the implementation. So when these rules were designed, really the first that the coffee industry and many of the representatives from the producing countries found out about it was after it was passed. And EU representatives began meeting with
ICO,
senior government officials and ICO and different people around the world, policymakers around the world, to say, okay, here's what we've got. And what I've heard from some of those meetings is there were jaws that were dropping. It's like, how are we possibly going to implement this? How will we be able to afford this? We don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the technology, we don't have really the know-how to be able to comply. And I think then it was a sudden realization that maybe those who designed the rules did not really understand the supply chain fully and what the possible impacts would be of the implementation.
Which is the perfect place for us to head into the next episode, where we're going to be talking about the technical details of EUDR. So join us for the next episode, folks. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, friends. Please don't forget to show us some love by subscribing, liking, commenting, and most of all, sharing this podcast with your friends. Check the show notes for links, including our sponsors and our Patreon. And stay tuned for more great conversations on the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward.